I'm part of the Davies family from Tongwynlais. We had Castle Stores for many, many years. My great-grandparents, my grandparents and my parents ran it until Mum and Dad retired, long time ago now, and it was all sold up. Castle Stores, as I say, was built in 1885. And this is a contract from the builder, and there's a sixpenny stamp on it from William Williams, and it was a guarantor, John Howells, with the use of old materials from the old cottages. So there must have been pre-1886, there must have been cottages that they used some of the original stonework from. It was built in so many stages. The first payment was put on when you reached the first sill of the house, and then another payment went on when all the windows went in, and you gradually went up, and the last payment was made when the roof went on. So you can imagine it was an enormous undertaking, because it was all flagstone floors all the way through the ground floors. All the walls are at least 2 foot thick stone. There was a shop, and then there was a room behind it that backed onto the brook. Then there was a storeroom at that side, and years later my mother had a kitchenette built on the back. And then you went across the yard where the big archway was into my grandparents, where my grandparents lived. And there was 2 bedrooms and an enormous bathroom in there. There was a lounge, a sitting room, and a big kitchen across the back, and a huge garden for the both houses that went right up to the brook, right at the back. When Mum and Dad got married, nobody lived in the upstairs part above the shop for a long, long time, and it got very dilapidated. So Mum and Dad did it up to make it more habitable for their marriage and any children they had, which was me and my sister. So we all had a bedroom each, and then Mum made a lovely sitting room, which was on the corner overlooking the Lewis Arms. Really big sitting room with a double aspect, and that was like a posh room with a nice carpet in and a nice suite and a telly. There was 7 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, which was not enough, I have to add. Mum and Dad had the biggest bedroom at the back, which sort of looked over the archway, there were lots of outhouses as well. There was a salt house and a bake house, and a place where they stored all the wood for baking. And then above it was a place that you dried the wood that went on the bit. That was a house in itself. It was huge. And a loo. For some reason, there was a little loo right at the back. And it's still Welsh slate roof, and I got a feeling the Welsh slate roof's still there. It's £640. Now, top that up today, you're probably looking at £1 million, maybe. I don't know. I mean, John Howells, I think he was something to do with the band as well. And he was obviously some relation of my grandparents or my great-grandparents. And he stood guarantor for this massive sum of £640. And we never knew, he just appeared. There's no sort of historical records beyond this about John Howells. But I've got a feeling, when you look back at the 1877 or 1875 census, there's a John Howells there with a young lad called Silas, and they were American. So I know we had some American relatives in Buffalo, because once they came over to see us. So it's obviously connected there, but there doesn't seem to be any route we can go around to find out any more. But I know Silas stayed with my great-grandparents, and they sort of adopted him, and then he must have moved on, because I don't remember him in the house. But he must have moved on, and he went to Oakdale, and he had the garage in Oakdale, so he lived up there for a long time, and occasionally we'd see his sons. They used to come and visit. Jeff, I think his name was. But Silas, as far as we know from the census, was American. And there it is, instalment records. I mean, can you imagine doing that today? You just can't imagine it, can you? I'm so interested in this. I suppose we'll all have to put it in a museum one day, maybe on the tan yard or something. Here we are, and that's how the castle stores started, with my grandparents and my great-grandparents, and this John Howells, who we have no record of. I got a book here that's the first entry is 1877, and it was brought forward £1, 2 and 6pence. That was February the 20th, and then as each purchase was made, all the way down to March the 13th, cash was paid. The bill was £2, 2 shillings and 10p. Bread and butter is paid cash, and then the balance is brought forward again. So it goes on, and William Williams is here. Now that's the chap that actually built the shop and the house, and he had paid cash. You know, they have bills of £1, which was probably a lot of money then. It started off in 1877, and it probably ends up when my mother took over, and then it all went to pot. And all the purchases were put in here and all paid up. Everybody was on tick. And then my mother completely wrecked it all by scribbling in it and crossing stuff out. Mum, as I say, everybody used to have things on tick in the shop, and they'd pay up the end of the week. And if they couldn't, well, no problem, do it next week. So, and the last entry is Mrs. Brookman's. And she owed £3, 9pence, and that was paid off. It's like a history of life and how people lived and how they ate. And it's lovely to keep. It'd probably have to go somewhere in a museum maybe one day. Mum and Dad took it over when my grandparents sort of semi-retired, and when I was about 3, that was the first time I could see over the counter, because I used to pile up the biscuit tins and stand on them so I'd actually see over. My sister, she'd do lots of things in the background, but she never wanted to go in the shop, and I was there from the minute I could walk, basically. It was great fun. I can remember a lot of laughter, a lot of characters coming in and out. We used to have some people from the village come to work for us. Joyce Lloyd was one, Howard Lloyd's wife, and Molly Gibbons was another one. And they worked part-time for us. And it was just a nice time. We used to get people coming in the shop on a Saturday morning with their wives' orders. They go over the pub first, come in with the orders for the weekend, which my sister used to do in the back room. And on the other side would be the bets. For my mother was a bookies runner as well as everything else. So we used to phone in the bets. The vicar was always very present with us. We had a big back room behind the shop, and it had the phone in and a coal fire. And the vicar used to fall asleep in the corner, and I used to sit on the windowsill phoning in the bets to Gomer Charles, which was probably highly illegal because I was only 7. But it was something Mum did, something Mum liked, and I think it was a bit of extra cash for her. And we did it for years. And I used to go on a Thursday when it was half-day shopping, and Mum would settle up with Gomer Charles and give him all the money she'd taken over the weekend. And he used to give me ½ a crown, which my mother used to take off me. She said, "What do you need ½ a crown for?" So that was an enduring memory there. Another one was our vicar, Vicar Griffiths. And he used to come in the shop every month with a pad and paper and say, "Right, what's happened this week?" And he'd write out the reports from all the things that went on, as usually involving me, if I'd done something wrong. And then he'd write to his sister-in-law and tell her what's gone on. We used to have, Jimmy Neville used to keep the Lewis Arms. And, it was a very busy household. And some days Mum and Dad didn't have time to eat. So Jimmy used to come over with a plate of food for them. And it was just, they were lovely neighbours. And Ethel and Cyril Painter, who lived next door, Ethel used to come in one day for 1 egg. And she'd come in the next day for another egg. And apparently what they were doing, one day she'd have the yolk and Cyril have the white, and the next day she'd have the white and Cyril had the yolk. So it was things like that. And she'd come in for 5 potatoes. And I used to weigh up 5 pounds of potatoes. Oh, no, no, Ros, she said, I want 5 potatoes. This is the sort of thing that went on that can't happen today. And I know things move on. You don't want to be stuck in the past. But some of the memories we've got and some of the fun we had, we were never made aware. There were obviously problems, with money, I should imagine, because it was a big household. And when you think about it, how big it was, there was all flagstone floors, 2-foot thick walls, and the house was freezing. You'd get up in the morning and you'd see your breath, or there'd be ice on the inside of the windows. So, and it was an enormous back garden, and my gran used to have Reg Daw to come in and do some of the work for her. And then we had this mad dog that every time the daffodils came out, he used to eat them. So my gran used to go nuts. But Reg used to come and dig over the garden. We used to keep pig swill for the pigs I used to keep up the farm. And it was interesting. Saturday afternoons were my favourite. Mum used to love watching the wrestling. And she'd go in the back room and I'd be in the shop serving people. I said, all you need now is a pot-bellied stove, and it'd be like an old Wild West, because that's when all the gossip started. And they'd say, yes, Ros, you know. And I said, how do I know these people? I wasn't born to 1950, and they expected me to remember all the characters that my mother remembered. Oh, he said, you know. I said, no, Mum, I don't. I'm sorry, I'm 16. How can I possibly know somebody from 1920s? And we used to have these shutters, wooden shutters on the front that Mum used to shut every night. And people used to come and help her do them, because Dad was off somewhere and Grandpa was too old. So these are the things that I remember. Joneses, I can remember, Dad used to do these special offers now and again. He used to put a sign in the window, and Mrs. Jones used to come and sneak and have a look to see what he'd done, and then she'd go and do the same thing in her shop. But it wasn't a problem. It really wasn't a problem. I mean, Dad had, it was a lovely shop. You could get everything there. One end was the sweets and the cigarettes. The other end was all the groceries. And then at the top, there's a big marble slab with the cheeses and the meats on. And my grandpa used to sit up there in the corner and, he'd serve people. And I don't know whether anybody remember Roger Watkins' sister Gillian. She was quite disabled, and she had hydrocephalus, and for a long, long time we thought, maybe she wouldn't live, but she did live quite a long life. And she used to come in the shop and she'd have a bit of banter with my grandpa, and when my grandpa died, she wouldn't put her foot in there again. And when her mum came down to do the shopping, she'd leave her outside. No, Grandpa Dolph's not there. She said, I don't want to come in again. And she'd sit outside in the wheelchair until her mum had finished and she'd wheel her home. So it was very close. And we used to have these big meat hooks stuck in the roof on the ceiling. And that's where they used to hang the bacon to cure it. And you used to have this huge bacon cutter in the back. It was red. And you turned a handle and there was this enormous blade on it. And you'd feed the bacon through and you'd cut slices off it, thinking you could have cut your fingers off, but nobody ever did, and it was just great. Carrefours was one of the things that I think prompted Mum and Dad to realise that the days of the corner shops were gone, unless you joined Spar or something like that, which they didn't want to do. They were coming up to 60, and they said, no, we don't want to start again somewhere else. So they did ask my sister if we'd be interested in taking it on. And I said, well, no, not thanks, for the very reasons you've just told me. It doesn't have a future. And I think we were proved right. When she went up to Carrefour's, when it first opened, we went up in the car to have a look. And we saw some of our customers shopping up there. And she said, well, that's telling us this is the future and we need to go. And I think what sort of put paid to it for Mum and Dad was VAT. When VAT came in, they couldn't get to grips with it, because you never had to do anything like that before. And they retired not long after, and they moved to Rabina, and she still had the VAT people onto them, years after they retired. And she said, no, Not for us anymore, Ros. It's gone. And I can remember my mum was living with my sister over in Rabina. I used to pick her up every Friday and bring her up to Penturk for the weekend. And I said, would you want to see the shop, Mum? I said, oh, yeah, she said. So we came up Rabina Hill, down the Black Cock Road. I stopped outside the shop and she started to cry. So I thought, oh dear, that was a bad mistake. She was just so upset at seeing, she expected it to be as it was, and it changed completely. And there was a big arch in the middle, and where Dad used to pull his cars in the night. And the memory of it, I think, oh, she was quite old then, she was in her 80s. I think the memory of it, we never spoke of it again. And I miss it, I still miss it. And I think if I ever went back, I'd want it to be as it was, not as it is. I think a lot of people think like that now. It's a lovely village with a lovely atmosphere, and it's gone. It's gone, and it's a great shame.